Good morning. Our gathering hymn today is hymn number 34. We praise you, O God, our Redeemer. Hymn number 34. If you're able, please rise.
I thought I had a voice, I was singing. Good morning and welcome here on this wintry morning after we had spring and summer and now we're back to winter again. Whether you're here in this place online or joining in later, no matter where you are or who you are, we hope you feel God's loving presence surround you as we worship together. I'm going to light the lamp to remind us of God's loving grace that spreads out like light and warmth to all who are in God's presence. I was writing this after a day of meetings at both the region and the township. And in the last month alone, I've seen and been involved with political maneuvering, posturing, and even bullying by politicians, residents, and community leaders alike in both public and private settings. I do have a political position, but I don't like the political game. I know I have to play it because we all are really wrapped up in a system that essentially looks for power. In government, in business, in sports, in social settings, and yes, even in church. Even as we try to help the most vulnerable, there's an element of power and judgment that seeps through. Jesus played the game so well. I'm sure he didn't like it either, but boy, he knew how to play it. We have been following the last week of Jesus' life, starting with his entry on Palm Sunday, the cleansing of the temple on Monday, and here we land on Tuesday, a day when the church leaders do their utmost to trap Jesus, with some texts that we don't spend a lot of time looking at. Permit me to start with a short political lesson from ancient Rome. The ancient Romans conquered most of the world surrounding the Mediterranean and beyond. They often put in place local governors and allowed local people to follow their own religious beliefs, installing their own local leaders with one proviso. that they could retain their own laws and local government if they demonstrated loyalty to Rome and remitted and collected the required taxes. It was called a time of Pax Romana, and Rome kept the peace. Any sign of insurrection was quickly quelled. In Jerusalem, the rule of law was kept by the teachers of the temple, and they knew they walked a fine line between satisfying Rome and being true to their own teachings. Enter Jesus. He stirred the pot. His parallel entry into Jerusalem alongside the Roman rulers who were coming to collect their due was a political statement that would have been understood by the Jewish people and the Romans alike. His uproar in the temple, the very place where the temple leaders should have had the most control and influence, would have caused raised eyebrows to the Roman officials who had just arrived to ensure that all was well. Then there was a gathering of people following him and ignoring the Roman and Jewish officials. How could the scribes and Pharisees protect the Jewish people from the wrath of Rome with these political nose-thumbings? They had to somehow discredit this Jesus of Nazareth to demonstrate to the Romans that they were indeed in control and that they could collect their money and be on their way. That is what Tuesday was all about. Power and influence, keeping the peace, stirring the pot, questioning priorities, questioning interpretations, fighting for power, pushing back against injustices, and trying to maintain the status quo. Talk about speaking to current events. Pick a spot in the world today, any spot. Our texts today focus on 3 such events. In the first, the chief priests, scribes, and elders all questioned Jesus' authority in order to try to discredit him with his followers. The second is especially full of plays on words that we don't quite appreciate in translation. Gives us lots to consider in our use of money. And in the final text, we see a scribe who has an aha moment as Jesus rises to the challenge when asked what is the greatest commandment. Please pray with me. Oh God, it is difficult to live in a world of contradictions, power struggles, food insecurities, inadequate housing, bullying, gossip, and contradictions. Yet we know we are blessed beyond measure in so many ways. Still, we are often unsure how to share our resources and our gifts in ways that uphold the values and love you ask us to share. Help us settle into your love today, to be one with the world around us, the rain, the snow, the trees, the fields, the birds, the rocks, the earth. As we take a deep breath, let your Spirit fill us with love for this planet we call home and our neighbors across the street and around the world. Let us hear you speak in that still small voice. Amen.
Hymn number 118, In the Lord I'll Be Ever Thankful. Hymn number 118. Please stand. We'll sing it 2 times.
Are there children and youth here this morning that would like to come up? Awesome. Welcome this morning. In the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about a very important week in Jesus' life, and I wonder, have you guys ever been in a competition? Yeah, tournament, sports events, spelling bee. I'm getting frowns when I say spelling bee. Or did you have to write a test sometime? Maybe a music test or a test at school? How did you prepare for that? So some of you said yes to being in a competition. What did you have to do? Did you just get up one morning and say, I'm going to compete? Sometimes you do that. My grandson was in a running race yesterday, and he doesn't do a lot of training, but he does some, and often we have to do a lot of work to prepare for competition. In the story today, Jesus was 35, 36, and we have one story of him talking to the teachers in the temple and asking them questions when he was 12. But we don't have much information in between that time and when he started preaching. But I can imagine he spent those 20 years doing lots of things. Traveling, going to the temple or church, playing, hanging out with his friends, going to parties maybe. But mostly, I think he was getting ready for this particular week, the week before Easter. It turned out to be kind of like a major tournament for him. The teachers and preachers weren't sure about him because he was now a teacher and teaching very differently from how they did 20 years earlier in the temple. They were trying to trick him. But Jesus knew what he was talking about and the message he wanted to get across, and he knew how to use the ancient teachings and bring them into the time in which he lived. So one of the things they tried to trick him about was paying taxes. Back then, Rome ruled most of the Mediterranean world, but allowed areas like Judea to have their own government. And the scribes and Pharisees provided that leadership. So much of the time they were in charge, but every year Rome came and collected taxes from everyone who lived there. And it was a reminder that they had to follow certain rules and laws that Rome set out, and that in reality Rome ruled. So I have a bag here. Anyone guess what's in here? Coins, you're right. So I'm going to open it up, and you can come and take one. Okay, take a look at it. There's a moose on one side, and what's on the other side? Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, I haven't seen one with King Charles yet. Can you read the words? Can you read what it says on the side where Queen Elizabeth is? It says Queen Elizabeth II, and there's some other words. It says DG, it looks like Regina. That's how we would pronounce it, Regina. It means Dei Gratia Regina, and it means Queen by God's grace. It means that God has granted her the privilege and duty of being the queen. The Roman coin had an image of the emperor and the words Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, inscribed on. I won't read the Latin because I don't have it here. But what does divine mean? Do you know? It means like God. So the implication is that the previous emperor, Augustus, was a god, and that Caesar, was the son of God, which kind of makes him a god too. So you each have a coin. Is it your coin or is it my coin? It's my coin? Maybe. If I tell you you can keep it, then is it your coin or is it my coin? Then it's your coin. When does it become yours? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but yeah, when I told you you could keep it, I guess that becomes yours. That was the kind of trap the priests were trying to catch Jesus in. But he had a wise answer, and Janet will talk much more about this later. So when she's talking, maybe think if you can figure out what that wise answer was. Now, I know it's only a quarter, but this week I want you can keep it. And this year I want you to look at it and think about how you might use your own money and your resources, your talents, and what is important about money today. But before you go back to your seats, I want to read a passage from the Peace Bible that kind of sums up all of Jesus' teachings. Can you see that picture if I said it like that? Okay. Another day, when Jesus was in the temple, a scribe came to him. The scribe had overheard Jesus arguing with the other leaders about difficult questions. The scribe knew all the laws and commandments that people in the temple were supposed to follow. But he had his own question. Which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus said, the first, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Nothing is more important than these." The scribe said, "Teacher, this is right. Loving God wholeheartedly and loving your neighbor as yourself. These things are more important than all the offerings and sacrifices we can give." Jesus saw the man's wisdom and said, "You are close to God's kingdom." No one dared to ask Jesus any more questions after that. So, I think you've probably all heard that verse before, maybe Sunday school or VBS. So, why don't you say it with me? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Something to remember as you go back to your seats and have a fun March break. Okay, thank you. You can go back. And we do have 3 scriptures that we're going to read today. Mark 11, 27 to 33, Mark 12, 13 to 17, and 28 to 34. They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave this authority to you?" Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me." Well, they discussed it among themselves and said, "Well, if we say from heaven, he'll ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin, they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." Later, they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin and he asked them, "Whose image is this? Whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," Jesus answered, "is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." "Well said, teacher," the man replied. "You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions.
Let us sing hymn number 797, "We Are People of God's Peace," hymn number 797. Please stand.
What's in your wallet? It's a slogan for a credit card company. It's also a good question, the kind of question Jesus asks the Pharisees and Herodians who try and trap him into saying something that could get him killed. But what is in your wallet? For most of us, our wallet is a place to keep ID, those government-issued cards that verify our identity and give us access to the privileges of citizenship. A health card, a driver's license, a social insurance card, a birth certificate. Our wallet is also a place to keep money and our access to it. Perhaps we carry some cash, a bank card, a debit card, a credit card, or cards. And we may also have some loyalty cards so that when we make a purchase from one of our favorite retailers, we build up credit to put against a future purchase. We might have business cards or other cards that identify our credentials or our membership in a club, a gym, a professional association. Perhaps we even have room for pictures of loved ones in our wallet. You can tell a lot about a person by the contents of their wallet. It's a window into our identity, access, privilege, loyalty, and values. In the biblical story we heard today, when Jesus asks the Pharisees and Herodians to show him a denarius, the standard silver coin minted by Rome, he was essentially asking a "what's in your wallet" type of question. But let's zoom out a little bit further first and explore the wider context for this story and this question, and Sandy already did a bit of this. We are on a Lent journey exploring the last week of Jesus' life. In particular, we are paying attention to how Jesus fights, using this book, Fight Like Jesus, how he wages peace with urgency and intensity in the last days of his life. And he began the week on Sunday, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey and weeping over Jerusalem with his lament, "If only you had recognized the things that make for peace." On Monday, he cleared the temple, chasing out the money changers and the people selling animals for sacrifice. And most of us probably can't recall a single thing that happened on Tuesday of Holy Week. We usually jump from the events of Palm Sunday right to Good Friday, and yet Tuesday receives more attention by the gospel writers than any other day in Holy Week. Most of what happens on Tuesday is dialogue-based, so perhaps that makes it less memorable. There isn't any dramatic event on Tuesday, not like some of the other days that week. On Tuesday, Jesus goes right back to the temple, the scene of his dramatic clearing effort from the day before. And at first glance, that seems crazy. Why would he go back there? After what he did there on Monday, the chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to kill him. But there is some protection in the crowds that follow him. The temple was full of his supporters, which meant his opponents didn't dare touch him there. So the chief priests, teachers of the law, and elders need to convince Jesus' followers to turn against him. And they make a plan to trap Jesus in his own words. They're going for a gotcha moment to discredit him in front of his followers. And we won't cover all of the Tuesday dialogue today. Here's a bit of an overview. There are 3 main acts on Tuesday. The first 2 take place in the temple. In the first act, Jesus is baited with 5 tough questions by the religious leaders and astounds the crowds with his answers. In the second act, Jesus goes on the offensive with a lengthy rant of the religious leaders and a series of warnings. And in the third act, as Jesus and his disciples leave the temple and head back to the Mount of Olives, he uses coded and apocalyptic language, foreshadowing the coming destruction of the temple and a tragic future filled with suffering when nations war against each other. And he calls his disciples to refuse to participate in the violence. Today we're only looking at the first act of Tuesday, when Jesus is baited with 5 tough questions. And Sandy read about 3 of those. And I'm going to mostly focus my attention on one of those. a text that has often been misused in Christian history to justify violence. I want to look at the second question the religious leaders asked Jesus. Is it right to pay taxes to the emperor or not? All 5 of the questions meant to trap Jesus have to do with authority. The religious leaders are threatened by Jesus. He speaks and heals with authority. He forgives sins as if he has the authority to do that. And who does he think he is to clear out the temple courts? Who is he to challenge the way the pilgrims in the temple pay for their sacrificial animals? And so they try and trap him with a money problem, a politically loaded question. But first, they try to flatter him. They praise him for his integrity, for always telling the truth, for not being swayed by public opinion or giving deference to someone just because they have an important face. And then they lay the trap. Is it right to pay taxes to the emperor or not? If he says yes, then the people will turn against him because they hate paying the tax and hope that Jesus will rid them of the Romans. If he says no, the authorities could arrest him for inciting a revolt against Rome. But Jesus recognizes the trap and evades it. Bring me a denarius and let me look at it, he says. In other words, what's in your wallet? The denarius that Jesus asks to see is the standard silver coin minted by Rome. On the front is the face of Tiberius Caesar, and around his image are the words, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. On the reverse side is an image of the goddess of peace. The message on the coin is clear. Respect the face, pay the tax, and the Son of God will give you peace. Pious Jews refused to carry the coin because its image and inscription violated both the first and second commandments. So Rome permitted the Jews to produce their own non-idolatrous coins to pay the taxes. Rome didn't care how the tax was paid, they just wanted it paid. By asking for the coin, Jesus does 2 things. First, he reveals that he doesn't have one. And he shows that the Herodians and Pharisees questioning him do have a denarius, and inside the sacred space of the temple at that. And they have disclosed in front of the watching crowd that they have the hated Roman coin. Whose image is this? Jesus asks, looking at the coin. The answer's obvious. Caesar's, of course. Notice that Jesus doesn't ask whose face is this. He asks whose image is this. Previously, his questioners praised him for not giving deference to somebody just because they had an important face. But by switching that word face to the word image, he does something significant. He is alluding to the central Jewish teaching that all of humanity is created in God's image, and he is inviting his listeners to ponder what that means. So then Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And there's another subtle nuance in the language here. When we read give to Caesar what is Caesar's, the word Jesus uses, apodidomi, as it is translated in the Greek, actually means more than give. It really means give back, repay, or return. And you can't give something back if you don't know to whom it belongs. And now the brilliance of his answer becomes clear, and his listeners are utterly astonished. Now he is asking them to consider what does belong to Caesar and what does belong to God. If we are created in God's image, if we have God's image imprinted on us, then we owe everything to God. All that we are, all that we have, and all that we do belong to God. And it's a refrain that runs throughout the scriptures. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, declares the psalmist. You may have noticed that there's a mirror here at the front on the path to the cross. And that mirror is the reminder that we are created in the very image of God and that all of who we are belongs to God, heart, soul, mind, and body. But if everything belongs to God, then what's left for Caesar? What do we owe to the Caesars of this world? The logical answer would be nothing. The Christian church has wrestled with this question throughout its history. What do we owe the state? What is the relationship between the church and the state? The apostles and earliest Christians answered the question by saying that since everything belongs to God, we owe Caesar only those things that align with God's purposes. We must obey God rather than human beings, they said, when they were ordered to no longer preach about Jesus. But in the 2nd century, when Justin Martyr was trying to convince the Roman emperor to stop persecuting Christians, he wrote that to God alone we give our worship, but in all other things we gladly serve the emperor. And this began a dualism in Christianity that persists to this day. It puts spiritual matters alone under God's authority, and Caesar is Lord over everything else. It meant that the only thing for pastors and priests to worry about was getting people into heaven, freeing the Caesars of the world then to boldly tell Christians what they must do with their life on earth. And during the Reformation in the 16th century, Martin Luther took this dualism one step further. His teaching came to be known as the doctrine of two kingdoms. He claimed that God actually put earthly kingdoms in place, and they were governed by a different set of morals. So Christians in their private lives were to obey the teachings of Jesus, but in their public role as citizens of an earthly nation, they were to support their political leaders, including taking up the sword for them if necessary. Quite a distance from Jesus' teaching. At first glance, the Apostle Paul in Romans 13 seems to agree with Luther's position when he tells his readers to submit to the governing authorities. But submission is different than obedience. Submission implies accepting the consequences of your behavior, whether you obey or respectfully disobey. And when Paul specifically addresses paying taxes, he draws a line in the sand. He says, "Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes." But then he adds, "Owe no one anything except to love one another." And to drive the point home, he adds, "Love does no harm to a neighbor." According to Paul, when the Caesars of this world order us to do something that would harm others, we must not obey. Love knows no boundaries. It is meant for all people, no matter their nationality, race, gender, sexual orientation, or religious affiliation. So Christian peacemakers are called to oppose laws that conflict with God's all-inclusive, nonviolent love. The bottom line is love. So let's come back to the question, what's in your wallet? If we have learned from Jesus' answer about paying taxes that the bottom line is love, then how does that impact what we do with what's in our wallets? It's a timely question. We're right in the midst of tax season, gathering our documents and paperwork to file our taxes for the year 2023. And most of us have probably complained about taxes at some point, grousing at how they mark up the price of goods and services and grumbling at how they seem to keep on increasing. Of course, we all appreciate good roads and bridges, clean water at the tap, sewer systems that work, security, safety, hospitals, libraries, parks, daycares, and so much more that our taxes pay for. I was really glad to be planning and leading this service with Sandy, who also serves as mayor of Woolwich Township. She knows firsthand the reality of taxes. Part of her role is to work with staff and other elected members of both regional and township councils to determine the needs and levy the taxes to pay for the services we need and want. And these, I'm sure, are difficult conversations. about priorities and preferences. There are so many things to try and balance: present and future, urban and rural, expectations from diverse groups, age demographics. And a good council will consult widely, listening well and asking important questions about who seems to be left out of the services or harmed by the systems in place. Doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people is a worthy goal, but it can also be a bit of a blunt instrument if we're not also asking who is left out, who is struggling. But even with the best of intentions, you can't please everyone. And we probably don't appreciate how difficult this role can be. And Sandy didn't tell me to say that. Jesus says more about money than any other topic. He reminds us that we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve both God and money. And he reminds us that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. He calls out political and religious leaders for exploiting and oppressing the poor. He encourages generosity. He tells parables about debts and wages. He challenges the rich young ruler to sell all that he has and give it to the poor. Now, this is not a rant against government leaders who make decisions about taxation levels. Our most cherished and valued services are paid for with our taxes, and most of us appreciate being part of communities where we all contribute to the well-being of others. And nor is this a rant against business people. Many of our beloved organizations and institutions are generously supported by people who have a knack for making money and who are willing to take risks and be leaders and employers, and not all of us are willing or able to do that. The question today's text raises for us is, how can we be peacemakers with our money? How can we use our resources to create families and communities of shalom? What do we do with our cash purchasing power? What are our priorities? What happens with our dollars in the economy? Who and what are they supporting? Who and what might they be harming? Where does the food we eat come from and how is it grown? Where do the clothes and shoes we wear come from and how are they made? What about our furniture, our vehicles, our jewelry, the battery components in our cell phones and computers? How are the workers paid who make all of these things we consume? And what is the environmental footprint of all the manufacturers? What kind of companies and businesses do our investments support? It is tricky. It's tricky to trace the supply chain and figure out where our stuff comes from and how it gets to us. It takes work to figure out what harm or good our investments might be doing. And it takes effort to find more sustainable options. And it is complicated. What if more sustainable options aren't available? What if greener, more just options are priced out of reach? What if a product is greener in its production but not at the end of its life cycle? It's tricky and it's complicated. That is true. Sometimes our resources can be tools of peacemaking and tools of exploitation at the same time. For example, when I buy a piece of clothing that is made in Bangladesh, I am, on one hand, helping to provide a job for a seamstress, most likely a woman with limited opportunities. At the same time, I am contributing to an industry that is one of the worst for its environmental impact on things like water use and pollution, probably harming the very community that woman lives in. Or if I purchase an electric vehicle, I'm eliminating carbon emissions from my driving. But the manufacturing of the battery and its disposal after the life of the car has a significant cost to the environment. So it is complicated. We can also say that it's actually simple. As he does throughout the last week of his life, Jesus sets up a contrast here. His radical vision and campaign for peace by nonviolent means creates a confrontation of two competing ideologies, the collision of two incompatible approaches to making and maintaining peace. And that's a quote from the Fight Like Jesus book. On the one hand, there are regimes that exploit, oppress, and put heavy burdens on their citizens. They take more than their fair share and use harsh force and violence to impose their will. On the other hand is Jesus' vision, where the works of shalom create communities of peace and justice, where all have what they need. In Holy Week, it's a clash and a showdown for the ages, but it will not be a battle fought with fists and swords, at least not by Jesus. In Holy Week, Jesus sets up the difference between his approach to peacemaking and that of the political and religious leaders whose authority he challenges. And he leaves us with a stark choice. Will the way of Jesus be our way or not? The way of Jesus is the way of shalom. It means harmony, health, and wholeness for all. It means that all our relationships with God, with each other, with the earth, with ourselves, are flourishing. It's a comprehensive vision that touches every aspect of our lives. And it becomes a reality when truth, mercy, justice, and peace kiss each other, as the psalmist describes. What we do with our money and our resources matters. Does our money make peace or contribute to violence and harm? Do our resources create communities of shalom or communities of inequality? Does our capital make love grow or does it make hate and harm flourish? Do our investments foster good in the world or harm? Do our loyalties promote harmony or division? Do our values encourage compassion, kindness, and generosity, or jealousy, selfishness, and greed? What is in our wallets? Shalom or injustice? Jesus' way of peace or the seeds of violence? I hope this is only the beginning of the conversation. I know it's hard to talk about money, partly because it's so tied up with our identity, our sense of self, our values. But what's in our wallet is an important question, an important starting place. In Holy Week, Jesus waged peace by calling us to a bottom line of love, by challenging human law if it conflicts with God's nonviolent love. Can we use that bottom line of love to guide what we do with what's in our wallets? May it be so.
Let us respond to Janet's words today by singing hymn number 745, God Who's Giving, hymn number 745. Please stand.
I have a few announcements to share this morning. After worship today, we will have regular junior Sunday school down in the basement, and we'll have our worship response time in the main area of the basement, continuing our themes from this morning and asking that question, what's in your wallet? And then afterwards at noon, we will gather for an informal Sunday potluck lunch. March 24th is our SJMC Progressive Supper, and this is where you can sign up to be a guest or a host for appetizers, main meal, or dessert, all three of them or one of them, whatever works for you. And all ages can participate. Sign-up sheets are in the upper foyer. I invite Marcia Shantz to come forward to make an announcement about the GST auction. I've got my first bidding thing here. Let's just move this down.
So, I don't know if you have been to the SJMC Church website recently, but Larry's been busy because of some of you who have made donations already to the Goods and Services and Talents auction. And when is that happening? Here's our date. It is Saturday, April the 13th at 5 o'clock. Come, bring your family and your friends, and you can have a delicious and nutritious barbecued hot dog. But we can't have a Goods and Services and Talents auction without donations. And when do we need your donation information? By Sunday, March 31st. That's 3 weeks away, and it also happens to be Easter Sunday. There are 2 ways you can donate: the good old-fashioned paper way on green sheets on the foyer table, or online, and that's on the church website. What we do need is some auctioneers, and we are not having a professional auctioneer this year for the GST auction, so we'd like to tap some shoulders and have some volunteers, and we'll just take turns as congregational volunteers. So if that's something you've always wanted to try, maybe there's about 10 items that each auctioneer would auction off. I think that is about it. I'm not sure how many are online already, but I know that there are an additional 9 slides that Larry has to make up that are waiting, that have been donated, and they include a car wash detailing, some quilts, some children's chairs, a vintage dollhouse. There are many things coming yet, so keep checking the church website. Now, this has nothing to do with the GST auction. My other hat that I've been wearing is cleaning out a room in the basement, and I'm going to start organizing back here. And this is my way of saving money on our church spending plan. Yes, I would like you to go to your closet, and if you have a hanger for pants or skirts that you're not using, please bring it and put it in the basket on the lower foyer, and then we won't spend money on hangers out of our church budget. Thank you.
Lots of costumes to hang up, I suspect. And props and all the rest. We want to give thanks now for the generosity of the gifts and offerings shared today, the things that come out of our wallets. And so may they be used for the ministry of compassion and love in our world. So let us give thanks together. Thanks be to God. I invite the ushers forward. We want to take some time now to share the joys and concerns of our lives with each other. Sandy will come around with the mic, and just raise your hand if you have something to share this morning. Melinda up front here.
Melinda Metzger. I ask prayers for my friends in Philippi, West Virginia. This past Thursday, my host mom from when I did service, she passed away fairly unexpectedly. She picked up an infection in the hospital when she was there last month and has MS, and so it's an underlying condition that made it a lot harder for her to recover. So I think about her husband Jim and her son Daniel. In their whole house, they have a lovely house church in Philippi, and so their whole community. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Melinda. We want to think about you. Those have been important connections. You've gone back for visits and have those earlier connections from VS times, and want to pray for their family, for that community as they hold this. So let's pray together. O Lord, hear our prayers. I have a few items to share as well for prayer this morning. The flowers that are up front here are from the funeral yesterday morning of Linda Weber. And so we want to remember her family and friends in this time of grief and remembrance. And we want to pray for Henry and Karen Jansen. Henry spent most of last week at Grand River Hospital, and then he was able to have a procedure that was very helpful on Wednesday. It allowed him to return back to his home on Friday. So we want to give thanks for that, but also pray for ongoing healing and care on their journey. And we want to pray for Ruth and Kurt Martin. Ruth moved on Tuesday from Freeport to long-term care at Parkwood. He seems to be settling in very well there. And Ruth continues to be at Freeport. And in a visit, she talked about how her body is getting weaker, and she just appreciates your ongoing prayers for her. And Helen, Sue's sister Helen, moved this last week on Monday, I think it was, to Trinity Village in Kitchener, and then on Wednesday had cataract surgery. So lots going on for her, a busy week. I know busy week for you as well, Sue, but so grateful for that move and for the care that she's been receiving, and want to continue to pray for Helen and for Sue as one of her significant caregivers. And so for all of these families and people that we love in our congregation, we want to offer our prayers. O Lord, hear our prayers. Let us join together in prayer. O God, we come before you, reflecting on how you are the center of our lives. You invite us to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. You ask us to name the priorities in our life and to live from that center. You ask us to hold our hands open rather than closed. When we think about the resources in our life, our money, our possessions, our wallets, help us to hold them lightly and with the generosity and sharing you inspire. When we think about our jobs and employment, our volunteering, the active time we spend in the world, help us hold this in perspective and to engage this time with your compassion and grace shared with others. When we think about how we spend the open time in our lives, our activities, our hobbies, our pastimes, our times of rest and relaxation, help us to prioritize our relationship with you and to deepen our spiritual lives. Let us know and see how you are a part of everything. When we think about the relationships we have with our family, our friends, but also our neighbors and those we meet, help us to put you at the center of how we relate to others and let Christ shine through us. And so we pray for all of our life and that we put you at the center. O God, you are all we have. You give us what we need. Our lives are in your hands, O God. Our lives are in your hands. Amen.
Our sending song today is hymn number 717, Renew Your Church, hymn number 717. Please stand.
As you go forth in life, may you be filled with the grace and love of Christ, who reveals God's truth and teaches us how to love, especially in those still, quiet moments of our everyday lives. Go in peace.